Today I'm going to be answering one of your most asked questions and sharing my top 4 ways that I like to shop for vintage. Hey everybody, welcome to How to Be Fancy. I'm Heather, and before we get into today's video, I want to take a second and ask you to please subscribe to this video. We're getting really close to that 15,000 number, which is huge for my channel, and I would love us to reach that sooner rather than later. So if you think this video is helpful for you or a friend, feel free to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe as well. Now let's get into the vintage shopping. The first thing on my list is that everything in the world is a source. Whether that's antique malls, flea markets, garage sales, estate sales, I scour the newspaper every week just to see if there's anything in my area or in areas where I think there might be some vintage finds. I make a list, and sometimes on the weekends, that's what I do for fun. I also find a lot of things online through sources like Etsy and eBay. Those tend to have higher price marks, but sometimes you can find some really good things. Also, Instagram is my new BFF when it comes to vintage finds. Once you train yourself to keep your eyes open at all times for vintage, even your friend's, grandma's, neighbor's basement becomes a place of wonderment. Speaking of your friend's, grandma's, neighbor, my tip number 2 is to let people know what you're looking for. A lot of people don't wear vintage, aren't interested in vintage, or just don't know what to do with it. So when they run across these things, they either A, don't know what they are, or B, just really don't want to keep it for themselves, but would be happy to pass it along to someone like yourself. So I make it loud and clear that if anyone has vintage or knows anyone who would like to let me even see their vintage, I would love to do that. I've made a lot of really cool friends in the vintage community because of this, and I've also found some really great pieces. The other side of this is that once sellers know what you're looking for and what you're buying, a lot of times when they see things that remind them of you, they'll either tag you or give you, I've had people give me a phone call. In fact, this little top that I am wearing today, I dug out of a garbage bag in someone's backyard because I got a fancy little phone call. Tip number 3 is that you have to be consistent. So even my favorite sources for vintage don't have what I'm looking for all the time. So whether that's stopping by Goodwill on a weekly basis or making sure to visit my favorite flea markets every single time that they happen, going consistently really does pay off, and you will always find a treasure. You just have to keep looking for it. Tip number 4, and my final tip for today anyway, is that when you go traveling, instead of going to kind of the malls and more touristy places, look for vintage shops, flea markets. Even sometimes I'll hit up estate sales in random towns if we happen to be there on like a Saturday or Sunday. The cool thing about this is that you can find vintage that's kind of true to the region that you're traveling in, and you get to meet the local people. It's a little bit more of a deep dive into the local culture, and I find that it's a lot of fun to do that when you travel. So anytime that we travel, I like to at least hit up 1 or 2 vintage stores, flea markets, antique malls, and or garage sales. Hope this has been super helpful for you guys. Be sure to leave your tips down below because you know I'd love to hear them. I need all the tips I can possibly get. If you're ever curious about what I do with vintage that's too big for me, too small for me, or that I just can't keep, I will leave a link to my Etsy shop down below. If you need more How to Be Fancy before next week's video, feel free to follow me on social media. I'm at How to Be Fancy absolutely everywhere, and I'd love to see your smiling, lovely faces over there as well. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.